The maid opened the door and stepped back immediately. On the bed lay a man, his body mutilated in a manner that would shock an entire nation. Blood stained the white sheets where names had been written. The woman who had shared his room was gone. In her pocket, she carried something wrapped in paper. By evening, newspapers across Japan would carry the story. What happened in that Tokyo hotel room on the 18th of May, 1936? Hello, everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you are from and what time you are watching. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. Now, let us begin. It was Monday morning, the 18th of May, 1936, in the city of Tokyo, Japan. Spring had settled over the capital, bringing warm days and the smell of cherry blossoms that lingered in the narrow streets. The hotel stood in a busy district where travelers came and went without notice, their comings and goings recorded only in the ledger at the front desk. The building was modest but respectable, catering to those who required privacy and discretion. Sada Abe was 31 years old. She had been born on the 28th of May, 1905, in the Kanda district of Tokyo. She was the youngest surviving child in a family that had known loss. 4 of her siblings had died in infancy. She had grown up in a city that was changing rapidly, where traditional values clashed with modern ambitions, and where the role of women was being questioned and redefined. By 1936, she had worked in various establishments, moved between cities, and formed relationships with men who could not or would not commit to her. She had learned to survive in a world that offered few protections to women of her station. On that May morning, she would do something that would make her name known throughout Japan and beyond. What happened in that hotel room would spark a conversation about love, obsession, and the boundaries of passion that would continue for decades. Before that morning, at 15, she had been assaulted by one of the young men in her social circle. The incident had changed her. She became distant from her family, started misbehaving, wearing makeup, and no longer obeyed her father. In Japanese society, men were considered the head of the family, but by 1920, when Sada was 15 years old, women accounted for over 60% of the industrial workforce. Things were changing, slowly but unmistakably. In an attempt to correct their daughter's behavior, Sada's parents sent her to work in a geisha house in Yokohama when she was 17.
She arrived too late to be considered a genuine geisha by the other girls. Many had been raised entirely within the structure. Others had begun their training in their early teens. Sada was seen as an outsider, more like a prostitute than a true geisha. She had benefited from a better education than her counterparts, and knew more about the world. This made her popular with clients, but after 4 years, she contracted syphilis. In 1925, the disease could be controlled, but not cured, which meant she would be subjected to regular examinations. This was something geisha girls did not have to do, unlike legally sanctioned prostitutes. Sada decided that if she was now going to be treated like a prostitute, she would leave the geisha house and work in one of the many brothels in the city. Working in these establishments came with dangers. Young ladies in geisha houses were protected by the reputation and custom of the institution. Now that Sada was working outside that structure, there was little control. Her clients could come from anywhere, and many had no respect for her. In 1932, her mother died, and she returned to Tokyo. In late 1933, her father became ill, and she looked after him until his death in January 1934. Despite having been sent away as a teenager, Sada was a dutiful daughter and nursed her father to the end. Following his death, she continued to work as a prostitute, and was eventually arrested for being unlicensed. Her bail was paid by a client who then paid her to be his mistress. He gave her money and a place to live, but this gentleman was married and had no plans to leave his wife. Sada was determined to make a better life for herself. She left Tokyo and traveled 265 kilometers to the city of Nagoya. By now, it was 1936, and she was 31 years old. She found employment in a restaurant, where she met a professor named Goro Omiya. Soon, the two started a relationship. They kept it secret, as Goro had a desire to enter politics, and a relationship with Sada was not something that would aid his ambitions. He did, however, want to help his mistress, and encouraged her to take control of her finances. He also helped her obtain a training position in a small but very successful restaurant back in Tokyo. The restaurant was founded by a successful businessman named Kichizo Ishida. He was 40 years old and had started his restaurant 16 years earlier. By 1936, it had gained an extremely favorable reputation and was frequented by many high-society Tokyo residents. Kichizo, however, had a reputation of being a ladies' man. Soon after Sada started working in the restaurant, the two of them started a relationship. The relationship was intense, and Kichizo would take the new woman in his life away for weekends, leaving the running of his business in the hands of his wife. Sada soon became obsessed with him and began drinking. She realized that he would not leave his wife and that their intense relationship would one day end. She went to a Japanese theater where she saw a play about a geisha girl who threatened her lover with a knife. For some reason, she was fascinated by the play and went to a local shop where she purchased a large kitchen knife. The next time she saw Kichizo, in a somewhat similar way to the geisha girl in the play, she threatened him with it. However, instead of being concerned by her strange behavior, he actually found it quite amusing and arranged for them to spend a weekend away together. They checked into a hotel in Tokyo. They stayed for 2 nights. On the morning of the 18th of May, something changed. Ketted over and strangled him. She did not stop until she realized that he was dead. What happened next was very bizarre. Sada took the knife and cut off her lover's genitals. She then wrapped them in paper and put them in the pocket of her dress. She also wrote their names on the bedsheets with blood and carved her name into his left arm. She then calmly left the hotel. Later that morning, a maid entered the room and discovered the mutilated body. The police were informed immediately. Officers arrived at the hotel within the hour. They examined the scene, noting the names written on the sheets, the carving on the arm, and the nature of the mutilation. Items in the room were catalogued. The body was removed for examination. Witnesses were questioned. The hotel staff provided a description of the woman who had checked in with the deceased. By afternoon, the hunt for Sada Abe had begun. The press were very quick to report the story and wrote about it in detail. It did not take long for the news of the events of the morning of the 18th of May, 1936, to be known by people all over the country. There were many alleged sightings of her, but they all turned out to be false. Sada was staying in a small Tokyo hotel room. She had checked in using an assumed name and spent the next few days writing goodbye letters to her friends and family. She was planning to end her life by traveling to Osaka and jumping from Mount Koma. On Wednesday, the 20th of May, the police found her. She was still in the hotel room in the Shinagawa district of the city. They arrested her and escorted her to the police station. The press, still fascinated with the story, started digging into her past. Soon, the name Goro Omiya started to appear in newspapers, which destroyed his political ambitions. At the station, Sada was questioned by the officers. They were very surprised by her calm manner. She explained to them that as Kichizo was married, she knew that she could never be with him, but she could not stand thinking of him being with another woman. She thought that if she killed him, He would never be embraced by anyone else again, and she would have been the last woman to have been intimate with him. The officers recorded her statement in full. They noted her demeanor, which remained calm and almost serene throughout the questioning. The items found in her possession were catalogued, including the wrapped package she had carried with her since leaving the hotel. The evidence was sealed and forwarded to the examining physicians. The post-mortem examination determined that the cause of death was strangulation. There were marks on the neck consistent with manual compression. The victim had been asleep when the attack occurred. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting he had not struggled or awakened during the act. The mutilation had been performed after death. The physicians noted the precision of the cuts, suggesting a deliberate rather than frenzied action. The carved name on the arm was examined and photographed. The blood-stained sheets with the written names were preserved as evidence. The investigation continued methodically. Police traced Sada's movements over the preceding weeks. They interviewed staff at the restaurant where she had worked, neighbors at her previous residences, and acquaintances who had seen her with the deceased. A timeline was constructed. Witnesses confirmed that the relationship between Sada and Kichizo had been intense and consuming. Several reported that Sada had spoken obsessively about him, expressing both devotion and distress about the impossibility of their situation. The press continued to report the story extensively. By now, the whole of Japan was gripped by the case. But it was not just the newspapers that reported the story. Radio had been very popular in Japan since the mid-1920s, and the number of households who owned one had increased year on year. Families would sit together and listen to their favorite shows and, of course, the news. The broadcasts would constantly update the story of Sada Abe. If you are finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history.
We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now, let us continue. Strangely, however, instead of being portrayed as a killer, Sada was treated like a celebrity. It was reported that she killed out of love, not jealousy. The public seemed fascinated rather than horrified. Letters were sent to the police station expressing sympathy for her situation. Some women wrote that they understood her actions. Others said they admired her passion. The case had struck a chord with a population that was grappling with changing social norms and the role of women in modern Japanese society. Charges were formally laid. Sada Abe was remanded to custody. The trial was set to begin in November. The trial of Sada Abe began on the 25th of November, 1936, and large crowds gathered outside the courthouse. She pleaded guilty, in the knowledge that the crime carried a maximum sentence of death. She described her life and the events that led up to the fateful morning of the 18th of May, 1936. She spoke of the assault when she was 15, her time in the geisha house, her work in the brothels, the loss of her parents, and the series of relationships with men who would not commit to her. She explained that she had become obsessed with Kichizo Ishida, that the intensity of their relationship had consumed her, and that she could not bear the thought of him being with his wife or any other woman. She said that strangling him while he slept had seemed like the only way to keep him for herself forever. The mutilation, she explained, was so that she could keep a part of him with her always. The courtroom listened in silence as she spoke. There were no outbursts, no expressions of shock. The atmosphere was one of somber attention. The prosecution presented the evidence methodically. The physicians testified about the cause of death and the nature of the mutilation. The police officers described the investigation and Sada's calm demeanor when arrested. Witnesses testified about the relationship between Sada and Kichizo, confirming its intensity and her obsessive devotion. The defense did not dispute the facts, but argued for consideration of her diminished mental state and the circumstances of her life that had led to this moment. The court acknowledged her diminished mental state. On the 21st of December, she was convicted of murder in the second degree and of mutilating a corpse. The judge then sentenced her to 6 years in prison. She was taken to the Tochigi Women's Penitentiary, where she proved to be a model prisoner.
Due to her good behavior, she was released on the 10th of November, 1940. She had served less than 4 years of her sentence. Upon release, she attempted to live under an alias, first with her sister and brother-in-law, then working as a maid. However, each time her true identity was revealed, she was forced to move on. She met another man and went to live with him for a few years. But again, when her real name was disclosed, she was forced to break off the relationship. Sada then realized that it would be extremely difficult to live without being recognized, so she decided to embrace her notoriety. At the end of the Second World War, the social morals and culture started to change in Japan. In 1946, Japanese women finally received the vote. Sada was suddenly seen in a different light, not so much as the young woman who had strangled her lover, but as the young woman who had been the victim of the men who had exploited and taken advantage of her throughout her life. The narrative around her case shifted. She was no longer simply a murderer driven by obsession. She became a symbol of female agency, however extreme, in a society that had long denied women autonomy over their own lives and bodies. In the subsequent years, books and plays were written about her, including one written by Sada herself. She was by now famous in her country and went on book tours and appeared on stage. The public's fascination with her did not fade. Instead, it grew. She became a cultural figure, referenced in films, literature, and academic discussions about gender, sexuality, and social change in modern Japan. Her story was analyzed by psychologists, sociologists, and feminists, each finding different meanings in her actions. In 1970, Sada disappeared from public life. What became of her is unknown. It is claimed that the film director Nagisa Oshima managed to track her down to the Kansai countryside, where she decided to see out her remaining years in the tranquil surroundings of a Buddhist nunnery. This, however, has never been substantiated. Her final years and the date of her death remain a mystery. The case of Sada Abe continues to be studied and discussed. It raises questions about obsession, possession, and the extreme expressions of love and desperation. It reflects a particular moment in Japanese history, when traditional values were being challenged, and when women were beginning to claim spaces in society that had long been denied to them. Whether Sada Abe was a victim, a villain, or something more complex remains a matter of interpretation. The hotel where the crime occurred is long gone. The streets have changed. The city has grown and modernized beyond recognition. But the story persists, told and retold, examined from new angles with each passing generation. The name Sada Abe is still spoken in Japan, though the woman herself has faded into silence. Behind the windows, life continues. Beyond that, only the memory remains.